Princess Sylvana sat alone on the high balcony of the Virithian palace, watching the twin moons rise over the golden spires of her homeworld. The city below bustled with life, filled with towering warriors and noble families who saw themselves as the peak of evolution. The Virithian species was known across the galaxy for their size, strength, and combat skills. But Sylvana was different. She was small. Unlike her towering brothers and the powerful noble females of her kind, she was barely half their size. Her limbs were delicate, her frame slender, and her voice soft. Among humans, she would have been considered graceful, even beautiful, but among her own people, she was a failure. No Virithian male wanted her. For years, the royal court had tried to arrange her marriage, but every noble house had refused. A weak hair was a disgrace to their bloodline. Even the lesser houses avoided her. She had become an embarrassment, a princess who could not fight, could not lead armies, and could not secure alliances. Tonight, the grand feast of hares was being held in the palace, a gathering where noble hares displayed their strength, challenging one another in ritual combat. It was also a time when alliances were made and potential mates were chosen. Sylvana had not been invited. She never was. She heard the roars and cheers from the great hall below as warriors clashed in ceremonial duels. She imagined the noble daughters watching, choosing their future mates based on their victories. It was the way of their people. Strength ruled. Weakness was discarded. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. The door slid open, revealing her eldest brother, Prince Phaler. He was a towering warrior, his deep blue skin covered in golden ceremonial armor. His piercing yellow eyes held no warmth for her. "You should not be here," he said coldly. "The grand feast is a time for warriors, not fragile things like you." Sylvana clenched her hands into fists but said nothing. Arguing was pointless. Vaylor sighed, stepping closer. "The council has spoken. They will offer you to the first alien race willing to take you. The political trade, nothing more." Her heart tightened. She had expected this, but hearing it aloud still hurt. "No Virithian will ever take you as a mate," Vaylor continued. "You have no strength, no value. The Empire has no place for the weak." He turned and left without another word. Sylvana felt her breath shake, but she refused to cry. She had known since childhood that she was different. No amount of training had changed that. If strength was the only thing that mattered to her people, then she truly had no place among them. She rose from her seat, looking up at the vast night sky. Somewhere beyond the stars were alien worlds filled with species she had never met. Perhaps among them, there were people who valued more than just brute force. But she had little hope. The Virithian Empire only dealt with the strongest races, warriors, conquerors, and champions of battle. Who among them would ever want a small, delicate princess like her? And what kind of life awaited her if one did? Meanwhile, in deep space, Captain Elias Carter leaned back in his chair, watching the data streams flicker across the holoscreen. The human envoy ship, Dauntless, was approaching Virithian space for high-level diplomatic talks. Humanity had made great strides in the galactic community, but there were still many who saw them as nothing more than a young, reckless species. Elias smirked. He had made a career out of proving people wrong. As his crew prepared for their arrival, a new diplomatic message scrolled across his screen. It was a formal offer from the Virithian Empire. A marriage contract. Elias raised an eyebrow. He had expected trade deals, military agreements, or even minor disputes. But this. His eyes scanned the details, and his smirk grew into a genuine grin. A Virithian princess, rejected by her own people. Now that was interesting. And Elias Carter had never been one to ignore an opportunity. The grand hall of the Virithian palace was alive with the sounds of clashing warriors, deep roars, and the cheers of noble spectators. The Feast of Hares was in full swing, and the air was filled with the scent of exotic meats and burning incense. Noble warriors battled in ceremonial combat, their towering forms moving like living titans. Sylvana was not present. She never was. She remained in her chambers, staring at the stars beyond her balcony. But her solitude was about to end. The arrival of the human. The great doors of the palace opened with a thunderous echo, and the hall fell into a hushed silence. Every Virithian eye turned toward the entrance as a single human walked into their sacred gathering. Captain Ilias Carter stood tall, his expression calm yet confident. He was an envoy of the Terran Union, representing humanity's expanding influence in galactic politics. He wore a sleek diplomatic uniform, but the ease of his movements suggested he was no stranger to battle. Though smaller than the Virithians, he did not show a hint of fear. Whispers spread through the crowd. A human. Here. Why has one of the lesser species entered our halls? They have no warriors worthy of this feast. But Ilias did not flinch under their judging stares. Instead, he smiled, a gesture that unsettled many Virithians, as they rarely saw smiles used in diplomacy. At the far end of the hall, High Chancellor Vorkath, the leader of the Virithian Council, rose from his golden throne. His massive form loomed over the gathering, his deep blue skin illuminated by the firelight. "You come on behalf of your people, human." Vorkath's voice rumbled through the hall. Elias nodded, showing no sign of intimidation. "Captain Ilias Carter, representing the Terran Union. We come in peace and with an offer of alliance." The Chancellor and his council exchanged glances. The Virithians had respected humanity's rapid expansion, but they had never considered them equals. Before Vorkath could respond, another noble, Lord Carax, laughed, a deep, mocking sound. "Peace? Alliance?" Carax sneered. "Tell me, human, does your species value strength, or do you rely only on words?" Elias chuckled, tilting his head. "I'd say we value both. Words can stop wars before they start. Strength ensures those words are heard." Some of the warriors murmured at his response. A few even nodded in approval. The Chancellor narrowed his eyes. "And what does your species offer the Virithian Empire?" Elias smirked and pulled out his holopad. With a press of his finger, a document appeared in the air. "I was actually about to ask you the same thing," he said, "because according to this message from your own council, the Virithian Empire is offering a royal marriage contract to any race willing to take a certain princess off your hands." The hall fell dead silent. Eyes widened. Some nobles stiffened. Others glanced at the council in disbelief. No one had expected the human to bring this up. Vorkath's expression hardened. "That matter is unimportant." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Unimportant? You're offering a member of your royal family to another species. I'd say that's pretty important." A few nobles growled in anger, but the human did not back down. He could sense the awkward tension in the air. Clearly, the Virithians didn't think anyone would actually accept the offer. Elias crossed his arms. "Tell me, where is Princess Sylvana?" A few warriors scoffed. Lord Carax chuckled again. "The weakling. She has no place here." Elias's smirk vanished. His expression grew serious. "I see. So you call her weak and discard her." The hall went silent again. The humans were known for their unpredictable nature, but no one had expected a human to take interest in the forgotten princess. Elias glanced at the Chancellor. "If your people don't value her, perhaps you won't mind if I speak to her myself." A ripple of shock spread through the hall. The Virithians did not allow outsiders to question their traditions, yet this human stood before their entire nobility and challenged them outright. Vorkath's jaw tightened. He could not refuse without looking weak himself. "Very well," he said. "Speak with her, if you wish. But know this, she is a disgrace to our bloodline. Do not expect her to be anything more." Elias only smiled. "I'll be the judge of that." A princess's choice. Sylvana stood at her balcony, unaware of the storm brewing in the great hall. The stars were her only comfort in this world that did not want her. A sudden knock startled her. She turned as the door slid open. But instead of a guard or a servant, she found herself face to face with a human. He was smaller than a Virithian, but his presence was strong. His eyes were sharp yet kind, filled with something she had never seen from her own people, genuine curiosity. Princess Sylvana. His voice was steady, respectful. I'm Captain Elias Carter. I came to meet you. She blinked in confusion. The human. Here for her. No one had ever come to meet her. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen to speak to her not out of duty, but by choice. And she had no idea why. Princess Sylvana stared at the human, standing in her doorway. She had expected a servant, perhaps a messenger, but not this. Not a stranger from a species her people barely respected. Captain Elias Carter met her gaze without hesitation. His stance was relaxed but confident, and his brown eyes held none of the disdain she was used to from her own kind. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Elias gave a small, polite bow. Princess Sylvana, he said. It's an honor to meet you. Sylvana blinked. Honor? No one had ever spoken to her that way before. She straightened, folding her hands in front of her. You are the human envoy. That's right, Elias confirmed, stepping inside her chamber. He glanced around, noting the simplicity of the room. It was elegant but lacked the grandeur one would expect for a princess. No lavish decorations, no extravagant displays of power, just a lonely space tucked away from the rest of the palace. Why are you here? Sylvana asked, her voice cautious. Elias smiled slightly. I wanted to meet you. Her brow furrowed. Why? No one ever wishes to meet me. The human chuckled. That's exactly why I do. She tilted her head, confused. Humans were strange. Elias sighed, crossing his arms. Your council made an offer, one they thought no one would take. They were wrong. Sylvana's breath caught in her throat. You want to accept it. The idea was absurd. A human, a species her people viewed as untested, wanted to claim her, the unwanted Virithian princess. It made no sense. Elias shrugged. Why not? From what I've heard, your people don't see your true value. Sylvana stiffened. He spoke so casually, as if discussing trade agreements rather than her entire future. You speak as if you know me. I don't, Elias admitted, but I know what it's like to be underestimated. His voice was calm, but there was something deeper in it, something she recognized. It was the tone of someone who had fought for his place. A long silence stretched between them. Then softly, she asked, and if I refuse? Elias studied her, then smiled. Then you refuse. I'm not here to take anything you don't want to give. That surprised her. She had expected force, demands, conditions, not a choice. She had never been given a choice before. The council's shock. Less than an hour later, the great hall of the palace was filled with hushed whispers and tense energy. The Virithian nobles sat in their seats, staring at the human envoy who stood fearlessly before them. At the center of it all, High Chancellor Vorkath glared at Elias with undisguised disbelief. You accept the offer? The Chancellor's voice was cold, unreadable. Elias nodded once. I do. A wave of laughter and outrage rippled through the hall. Lords and warriors muttered among themselves. A human taking a royal Virithian bride. One noble sneered. Absurd. An insult. Another growled. Vorkath's fingers tightened on the arms of his throne. You understand what you are saying, human. Elias grinned. I understand perfectly. The council was furious. This was supposed to be a mockery, not an actual alliance. They had expected other species to reject the offer, further proving Sylvana's uselessness. Instead, this human had turned the situation against them. Vorkath's jaw tightened. Then so be it. His voice was like a distant storm, heavy with unspoken anger. From this day forward, Princess Sylvana is no longer of the Virithian Empire. A stunned silence followed. Sylvana stood beside Elias, her expression unreadable. She had expected her rejection for years, but to hear it spoken so easily. It still hurt. She was no longer a princess, no longer part of the empire. She belonged nowhere. Elias, sensing her hesitation, leaned in slightly. I meant what I said back in your chamber. You're not losing something. You're gaining something new. She looked at him, searching his expression for mockery. But there was none. Only certainty. Sylvana straightened, pushing the pain aside. Then I will leave this place with you, Captain Elias Carter. Another wave of murmurs spread through the hall, but Elias only smiled. Good choice, princess. A new beginning. As Sylvana followed Elias toward the human ship waiting beyond the palace gates, she felt something strange. For the first time in her life, she was not afraid. The Empire had abandoned her. Her people had cast her out. But this human, this strange and reckless envoy, had chosen her, and she intended to find out why. Sylvana walked beside Captain Elias Carter, her steps steady, but her mind racing. The great halls of the Virithian Palace, once her prison, now felt like a fading dream. She was no longer a princess, no longer part of the Empire. Her people had cast her out. The twin moons of her homeworld shone down as they approached the landing bay. The human ship, dauntless, stood waiting, its sleek silver hull reflecting the glow of the palace torches. A group of Elias's crew stood at the base of the ramp, watching her with curiosity. Her heart pounded. She had never set foot on an alien ship before. Would the humans treat her like her own people had? Would she always be the unwanted outsider? Elias glanced at her, nervous. Sylvana lifted her chin. No. His lips curled into an amused smirk. You're a terrible liar. She frowned but said nothing. An uneasy departure. The moment they reached the ship, a deep voice echoed behind them. Wait. Sylvana stiffened. She knew that voice. She turned and saw Valor, her eldest brother, standing at the edge of the landing bay. His golden armor gleamed under the moonlight, and his yellow eyes burned with something unreadable. He did not move closer, did not demand she stay. He only said, You walk away from everything. Sylvana held her ground. There was never anything here for me. Valor's expression did not change. You are still Virithian, no matter where you go. She hesitated. For all their cruelty, for all the years of rejection, this was the first time her brother had ever acknowledged her in any way. But it was too late. She turned and walked up the ramp, not looking back. The last thing she heard before the ship's doors closed was her brother's voice, quiet but clear. Survive, little sister. Then the doors sealed shut, and she left her homeworld forever. Aboard the human ship, the moment the ship lifted off, Sylvana felt a strange lightness. She had spent her entire life under the weight of rejection. Now she was free. But free to do what? Elias led her through the corridors of the Dauntless, his crew stepping aside as they passed. Finally, they reached a private chamber. It was smaller than her palace room, but felt more alive, filled with personal items, books, and a soft couch instead of cold ceremonial chairs. Elias gestured around. This will be your quarters for now. It's not a royal chamber, but it's comfortable. Sylvana touched the smooth walls. The ship hummed with quiet energy, so different from the towering silence of the palace. You treat me as if I matter, she said suddenly. Elias leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. You do. She turned to him. Why? I am not strong, not in the way my people value. Elias studied her for a moment before speaking. Strength isn't just about muscle and combat. Sometimes, surviving against the odds is the strongest thing someone can do. Sylvana blinked. No Virithian had ever spoken those words. Elias pushed off the doorframe. Rest up, princess. Tomorrow, we figure out what comes next. He left, and for the first time in her life, Sylvana was alone, but not lonely. The crew's reaction. The next morning, Sylvana stepped onto the command deck. The bridge was filled with human officers, each focused on their tasks. The moment they noticed her, Conversation stopped. She could feel their curious glances. Finally, one of the officers, a tall woman with dark skin and sharp eyes, stepped forward. "You must be the princess," she said. Zilvana nodded. The woman folded her arms. "I'm Commander Samantha Hayes, first officer of the Dauntless. You're the first Virithian to ever step foot on a human vessel. Hope you don't expect special treatment." Zilvana's shoulders stiffened. She had expected this. More rejection. But then Hayes smirked. "We don't bow to royalty here, but we don't abandon our own either. You're part of this crew now. You pull your weight. You'll be treated like family." Zilvana blinked. No tests. No impossible expectations. Elias stepped beside her, grinning. "You'll get used to us, princess." Zilvana's lips twitched in what might have been the start of a smile. A warning from the Empire. But before she could respond, a loud beeping filled the bridge. "Captain," a young officer turned from the communications console. "We're receiving a transmission from Virithian space." Elias frowned. "From who?" The officer hesitated. "High Chancellor Vorketh." The bridge fell silent. Zilvana's heart clenched. Elias gave her a questioning look, then nodded to the officer. "Put him through." A holographic image of the Virithian Chancellor flickered into existence. His deep yellow eyes locked onto Zilvana. "So, the weakling has fled," Vorketh said, his voice like ice, "and she has taken refuge with the humans." Elias crossed his arms. "That's right. You threw her away. She's with us now." Vorketh's gaze did not waver. "Then hear me well, human. You have taken something that belongs to the Virithian Empire. A disgrace she may be, but she is still of our blood." Zilvana's fists clenched. He had never cared before. "Why now?" Vorketh's voice dropped lower. "If you return her, we will consider this a simple misunderstanding. If you refuse..." The hologram flickered, revealing the massive Virithian warships gathering in deep space. "Then you have made an enemy of the Empire." The transmission cut off. The bridge was silent for several seconds before Elias sighed. "Well, princess," he said with a smirk, "looks like you just became a very expensive problem." Zilvana met his gaze, feeling something new inside her. For the first time, she was more than just unwanted. She was a threat. And strangely, she liked it. A heavy silence filled the command deck of the Dauntless. The transmission from High Chancellor Vorketh had ended, but his threat still lingered in the air like a storm waiting to strike. Zilvana stood frozen, staring at the place where his hologram had been. She had expected her people to ignore her, to let her go. But now, they wanted her back. Elias let out a low whistle, crossing his arms. Well, that escalated fast. Commander Hayes frowned. They never cared about her before. Why now? Zilvana finally found her voice. "It's not about me." Elias turned to her. "Then what is it?" She swallowed hard. "It's about power. If they let me go without a fight, it makes them look weak. A royal abandoning the Empire and joining the humans. That's a disgrace they can't allow." Hayes narrowed her eyes. "So they're coming after us to save face." Zilvana nodded. "And to send a message. If you don't return me, they won't just attack this ship. They'll declare war on your entire species." A tense silence fell over the bridge. Elias exhaled. "Well, that's just fantastic." The first attack. Before anyone could respond, a loud alarm blared through the ship. "Captain," one of the officers called out, "we have incoming hostiles." Elias turned sharply. "How many?" The officer's hands moved over the controls, scanning the readings. 3 Virithian warships. They just exited hyperspace. They were waiting for us. Zilvana's breath caught in her throat. The Empire had wasted no time. Elias clenched his jaw. "Shields up. Get us out of here. Now." The Dauntless lurched forward, engines burning as the pilot pushed the ship into full speed. But the Virithian warships were fast, closing the distance in seconds. A deep rumble shook the ship as the first blast hit their shields. Direct hit. Shields holding, but we won't last forever, Hayes reported. Elias slammed his fist against the console. Damn it, they came prepared. Sylvana's mind raced. She had spent her whole life watching Virithian military tactics from the sidelines, never invited to the war councils, but always listening. She knew how they fought. She took a sharp breath. You can't outrun them. You have to outsmart them. Elias turned to her. Got any ideas, princess? She nodded. Yes, but you'll have to trust me. A princess takes command. Elias studied her for a moment, then grinned. All right, let's hear it. Sylvana pointed to the navigation display. Virithian warships are fast, but they rely too much on their tracking systems. If we blind them, even for a few seconds, we can escape. Hayes raised an eyebrow. Blind them how? Sylvana turned to the weapons officer. Do you have EMP charges? The officer hesitated. Yes, but they're not strong enough to disable a warship. Sylvana shook her head. We don't need to disable them completely, just long enough to break their lock on us. She tapped the console, pulling up a star map. There's a dense asteroid field nearby. If we drop an EMP at the right moment, their sensors will overload. By the time they recover, we'll be gone. Elias's grin widened. I like it. Let's do it. The escape. The Dauntless banked hard, heading toward the asteroid field. The Virithian ship followed, firing relentlessly. Sylvana's hands tightened into fists as the ship shook under another impact. Shields at 40%. Hayes shouted. Hold steady. Elias commanded. Weapons, get that EMP ready. The ship weaved between massive asteroids, the Virithians close behind. Then, EMP ready, the officer called. Elias glanced at Sylvana. Your plan. Your call. Sylvana's heart pounded. She had never given an order before. Never been trusted like this. She took a deep breath. Fire it. Now. The EMP charge shot out, detonating just as the Dauntless made a sharp turn behind an asteroid. A pulse of energy spread outward, hitting the enemy ships. Their lights flickered, and for a brief moment, they staggered, unable to track their target. Now's our chance, Hayes shouted. The Dauntless blasted away, engines roaring as it disappeared into hyperspace. Aftermath. Silence filled the bridge. The Virithian warships were gone. Sylvana let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Elias turned to her, eyes filled with approval. Not bad, princess. A strange warmth filled her chest. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Hayes gave a nod of respect. You just saved all our lives. Sylvana didn't know how to respond. She had never saved anything before. Elias clapped his hands together. All right, people. We're in the clear for now, but the Empire isn't going to give up that easily. Let's figure out our next move. As the crew returned to their stations, Sylvana stepped to the viewport, watching the stars blur past. For the first time in her life, she had fought back. For the first time, she had mattered. And she was ready for whatever came next. The Dauntless raced through hyperspace, the hum of its engines steady. The ship had survived the first attack, but everyone on board knew the Virithian Empire wouldn't stop. Sylvana stood at the bridge, staring at the swirling colors outside the viewport. She had made a choice, one she could never take back. She wasn't just running from her past anymore. She had fought back, and the Empire had noticed. A moment of peace. Elias Carter stepped beside her, arms crossed. You look deep in thought, princess. Sylvana glanced at him. I was just remembering. He raised an eyebrow. Regrets. She shook her head. No, only questions. Elias smirked. That's the first step to figuring things out. Sylvana tilted her head. Humans always speak as if they have time to figure things out. Elias chuckled. That's because we do. We don't believe in letting the past control us. We make our own future. Sylvana turned back to the viewport, the human's words settling in her mind. Could she truly make her own future? Or would the Empire decide it for her? A warning from the Alliance. Before she could speak, the ship's communication console lit up. "Captain," Hayes called. "Incoming transmission from the Galactic Alliance." Elias's smirk faded. "Put it through." A holographic image appeared, a stern-looking alien with gray skin and deep red eyes. "This is Ambassador Kor of the Galactic Alliance," the alien said, voice cold. "Captain Carter, we have received reports that your ship is harboring a Virithian royal fugitive." Elias's jaw tightened. "She's no fugitive. She's a free person who chose to come with us." Ambassador Kor's expression did not change. "The Virithian Empire has officially declared your actions as an act of war." The crew froze. Sylvana's heart pounded. They would truly go this far. Kor continued, ignoring her question. "The Alliance has no desire for conflict, Captain. The Empire demands that you surrender the princess to avoid war." Sylvana felt a cold weight in her chest. The humans had saved her, fought for her, and now they were paying the price. Elias's hands curled into fists. "The Alliance preaches about freedom, but you're willing to throw her back to the people who wanted her dead." Kor's gaze hardened. "We must think of the greater peace. If one life can prevent war, then the choice is clear." Sylvana stepped forward. "And what of my choice?" she asked, voice steady. Kor finally turned his attention to her. "Your life is not worth the war that will follow." Her hands clenched. "To you, maybe. But to me, my life is worth everything." The ambassador said nothing. Elias exhaled sharply. "We're not handing her over." Kor's red eyes narrowed. "Then the Alliance will not protect you." The transmission cut off. Silence filled the bridge. Hayes let out a frustrated sigh. "Great. Now we're not just enemies of the Empire. We're alone." Elias turned to Sylvana. "Still think your people don't care about you?" Sylvana's mind raced. She had been nothing to them her whole life. But now, they were willing to start a war over her. Why? A dangerous truth. Sylvana thought back to her brother Valer's words. "You are still Virithian, no matter where you go." He had known this would happen. But why? She closed her eyes, searching her memories. There had to be something. Some reason why the Empire would go this far. Then, a fragment of memory surfaced. A conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. She had been young, hiding behind the great pillars of the palace, when she overheard the Virithian Council speaking in hushed voices. "The bloodline must remain unbroken. She is weak, but she is still of royal blood. If she lives, the prophecy remains unfulfilled. Then let her be forgotten. She will never rule." Sylvana's eyes flew open. It wasn't just about honor. It was about power. The Empire wasn't afraid of her running away. They were afraid of her existing. The next move. She turned to Elias, voice urgent. "We need to leave this sector, immediately." Elias frowned. "Why? What did you remember?" She exhaled sharply. "I don't think the Empire wants me back." Hayes gave her a confused look. "They just sent warships after us. That sounds like they want you back pretty badly." Sylvana shook her head. "No, they want me gone. If they capture me, they won't bring me home." She looked Elias in the eyes. "They'll kill me." The bridge fell silent. Elias's expression darkened. "Then we make sure they never get the chance." He turned to the crew. "Set a course for the outer rim. We need time to figure this out." The Dauntless changed course, speeding into the unknown. Sylvana took one last look at the stars behind them. The Empire was hunting her. The Alliance had abandoned her. She was truly alone, except for the humans who had chosen to fight beside her. And she would not let them down. For the first time in her life, she would fight for herself. And she would win. The Dauntless raced toward the outer rim, but there was no escape. The Virithian fleet was coming. Elias stood on the bridge, hands gripping the console. The tension in the air was heavy. "Captain," Hayes called. "3 warships just exited hyperspace. They've surrounded us." Zilvana's heart pounded. The Empire had come for her, and this time they wouldn't stop. Elias clenched his jaw. "Open a channel." A holographic image flickered to life. Prince Vaylor, her brother. His cold golden eyes locked onto her. "Little sister," Vaylor said smoothly, "it is time to come home." Zilvana lifted her chin. "Home. Or my execution." Vaylor smirked. "You have always been weak, but the Empire cannot allow you to exist outside of our control." Elias stepped forward. "She's not going anywhere with you." Vaylor barely glanced at him. "Human, you do not understand the power you challenge. Surrender her, and your people will live." Elias smirked. "Funny. I was about to tell you the same thing." Vaylor's expression darkened. "Then you will die for your foolishness." The transmission cut off. A second later, the Virithian warships opened fire. The final battle. The Dauntless shook under the impact of the first blast. Sparks flew across the bridge. "Shields at 60%, Hayes reported. Elias's eyes burned with determination. "Weapons, fire back." The ship's turrets roared to life, sending energy blasts toward the enemy fleet. One of the Virithian ships took a direct hit, its shields flaring. But it wasn't enough. "They're too strong," an officer shouted. Zilvana's mind raced. She knew the Virithian tactics. If they didn't do something drastic, they would be overwhelmed. She turned to Elias. "We need to take out their flagship." Kor finally turned his attention to her. "Your life is not worth the war that will follow." Her hands clenched. "To you, maybe. But to me, my life is worth everything." The ambassador said nothing. Elias exhaled sharply. "We're not handing her over." Kor's red eyes narrowed. "Then the Alliance will not protect you." The transmission cut off. Silence filled the bridge. Hayes let out a frustrated sigh. "Great. Now we're not just enemies of the Empire. We're alone." Elias turned to Zilvana. "Still think your people don't care about you?" Zilvana's mind raced. She had been nothing to them her whole life. But now, they were willing to start a war over her. Why? A dangerous truth. Zilvana thought back to her brother Vaylor's words. "You are still Virithian, no matter where you go." He had known this would happen. But why? She closed her eyes, searching her memories. There had to be something. Some reason why the Empire would go this far. Then, a fragment of memory surfaced. A conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. She had been young, hiding behind the great pillars of the palace, when she overheard the Virithian council speaking in hushed voices. "The bloodline must remain unbroken. She is weak, but she is still of royal blood. If she lives, the prophecy remains unfulfilled. Then let her be forgotten. She will never rule." Zilvana's eyes flew open. It wasn't just about honor. It was about power. The Empire wasn't afraid of her running away. They were afraid of her existing. The next move. She turned to Elias, voice urgent. "We need to leave this sector, immediately." Elias frowned. "Why? What did you remember?" She exhaled sharply. "I don't think the Empire wants me back." Hayes gave her a confused look. "They just sent warships after us. That sounds like they want you back pretty badly." Zilvana shook her head. "No, they want me gone. If they capture me, they won't bring me home." She looked Elias in the eyes. "They'll kill me." The bridge fell silent. Elias's expression darkened. "Then we make sure they never get the chance." He turned to the crew. "Set a course for the outer rim. We need time to figure this out." The Dauntless changed course, speeding into the unknown. Zilvana took one last look at the stars behind them. The Empire was hunting her. The Alliance had abandoned her. She was truly alone, except for the humans who had chosen to fight beside her. And she would not let them down. For the first time in her life, she would fight for herself. And she would win. The Dauntless raced toward the outer rim, but there was no escape. The Virithian fleet was coming. Elias stood on the bridge, hands gripping the console. The tension in the air was heavy. "Captain," Hayes called. "3 warships just exited hyperspace. They've surrounded us." Zilvana's heart pounded. The Empire had come for her. And this time, they wouldn't stop. Elias clenched his jaw. "Open a channel." A holographic image flickered to life. Prince Vaylor, her brother. His cold golden eyes locked onto her. "Little sister," Vaylor said smoothly, "it is time to come home." Zilvana lifted her chin. "Home. Or my execution." Vaylor smirked. "You have always been weak, but the Empire cannot allow you to exist outside of our control." Elias stepped forward. "She's not going anywhere with you." Vaylor barely glanced at him. "Human, you do not understand the power you challenge. Surrender her, and your people will live." Elias smirked. "Funny. I was about to tell you the same thing." Vaylor's expression darkened. "Then you will die for your foolishness." The transmission cut off. A second later, the Virithian warships opened fire. The final battle. The Dauntless shook under the impact of the first blast. Sparks flew across the bridge. "Shields at 60%, Hayes reported. Elias's eyes burned with determination. "Weapons, fire back." The ship's turrets roared to life, sending energy blasts toward the enemy fleet. One of the Virithian ships took a direct hit, its shields flaring. But it wasn't enough. "They're too strong," an officer shouted. Zilvana's mind raced. She knew the Virithian tactics. If they didn't do something drastic, they would be overwhelmed. She turned to Elias. "We need to take out their flagship." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You got a plan, Princess?" She nodded. "Their flagship is controlling the fleet's battle strategy. If we destroy it, the other ships will be disorganized." Hayes frowned. "That ship is heavily guarded. We'd never get close enough." Zilvana's eyes narrowed. "Then we make them let us in." A desperate gamble. Minutes later, Elias and Zilvana stood in the hangar bay. The plan was simple. Use a stealth shuttle to slip past enemy sensors, land on the flagship, and disable it from the inside. It was a suicide mission. But Zilvana refused to run anymore. Elias strapped into the pilot's seat. "Ready?" Zilvana exhaled. "Yes." The shuttle launched from the Dauntless, vanishing into space. As expected, the Virithian flagship didn't notice them. They were too busy attacking the Dauntless. Zilvana's hands tightened into fists. "Hold on, crew. Just a little longer." The shuttle slipped into the flagship's docking bay undetected. Now, the real fight began. The heart of the beast. Zilvana and Elias stormed out of the shuttle, blasters ready. The corridors were empty. "They don't even know we're here," Elias whispered. Zilvana led the way, navigating through the familiar halls. They'd reached the main reactor room, the heart of the ship. Elias grinned. "Time to shut this thing down." He placed explosives along the reactor's core. Suddenly, a hiss of doors opening. Virithian guards poured in, weapons raised. At the front stood Vaylor. "You truly are a disappointment," he sneered. Zilvana stepped forward. "Maybe, but at least I'm free." Vaylor's eyes burned with rage. Not for long. He lunged. A princess fights back. Zilvana barely dodged as Vaylor's blade slashed through the air. He was faster than her, stronger. But she wasn't the same weak princess anymore. She fought back. Blades clashed. Sparks flew. Vaylor's strikes were precise, but Zilvana had something he didn't: determination. She dodged a fatal blow and drove her blade into his side. Vaylor staggered, eyes wide in shock. "You," he gasped. Zilvana met his gaze. "Goodbye, brother." She turned and ran. Elias detonated the charges, and the ship trembled. Alarms blared. Fire erupted. The flagship was doomed. They raced back to the shuttle, taking off just as the ship exploded behind them. Victory at a cost. On the Dauntless, the remaining Virithian ships, now leaderless, flowed. The battle was over. Sylvana stood on the bridge, breathing heavily. She had won. Elias clapped a hand on her shoulder. Not bad, princess. She looked at him, a small smile forming. Not bad for a human either. Hayes approached. What now? Sylvana turned to the stars. She had no home to return to, no family left. But she had something better. She had freedom. And she had the humans, her new family. She straightened her shoulders. We move forward. The Dauntless turned toward the unknown, and Sylvana smiled. Her story wasn't over.